unorthodox style of leadership meant he was admired and feared in equal measure.
Dick took the floor like a statesman, and he proceeded to deliver this fearsome attack on short sellers, the people who were depressing Lehman's share price by being short the stock. And he, rather to everyone's surprise and mystification, he said,
"If we get this right today, hope it will squeeze some of those shorts. And squeeze them hard. Not that I want to hurt them. Don't get that, please, because that's just not who I am. I am soft, I'm lovable. But what I really want to do is I want to reach in, rip out their heart, and eat it before they die."
Dick Fuld also had an insatiable appetite for profits. Fava beans.
Welcome to the Michael Brooks Show. I'm Michael Brooks, and we are broadcasting live from downtown Brooklyn, USA, where left is best, as it is everywhere else, with super producer Matt Leck.
Hello.
Chief economist David Griscom.
How's it going?
Super producer David Slavic is in the digitosphere, in the ever-growing, ever-aggressive, ever-expansive TMBS universe. On this week's program, Alberto Almeida, he is a Brazilian political scientist and pollster. He's going to break us down the latest numbers coming out of Brazil's presidential election. Will a fascist fall? Will Lula orchestrate an election from prison? Matt Taibbi then returns. He has a new book out. It's being serialized. It's called The Fairway. It's an informal sequel to Chomsky and Bernstein's Manufacturing Consent. We'll also talk about the financials crisis 10 years later. We're still not jailing bankers, and we have a special gulag in the postgame. We're reading Thomas Friedman together, and then we're bringing it all home with a dunkathon on Andrew Cuomo. Shudder. Shoutout is going to be going to Norway, and of course to all of the people, including friend of show Wendy Wong, getting arrested, protesting the ongoing push for the confirmation of Judge Kavanaugh as the exceedingly credible accusations cascade and pour in. All that, plus we have a Leck Regulate, we've got Griscom's Economics, and so much more on the Michael Brooks Show. Let's get it. Well, let's start by talking about why corruption in and of itself is not a sufficient tool for understanding politics and understanding how power works. Nobody wants corruption. Nobody likes corruption, like nobody likes Andrew Cuomo. But corruption in and of itself, particularly when it's been weaponized by one side of political warfare, can never get us to a proper analysis of what we need to have in a complex situation. And of course, I'm referring to Brazil, but I'm also referring to the entire politics of Latin America's pink tide and the counteraction by the right against the left, and also how, more broadly, we conceive of these questions as institutional and not just moralistic ones. Liberals too often make this mistake. They believe that political institutions are neutral, especially legal institutions. But a material understanding allows us to see political institutions having distinct, though with not out contradiction orientations. So in Brazil, which is obviously very important to me and important to this show, you had a party, the Workers' Party, under the, as I always say, in terms of reality, the unparalleled political leadership of Lula da Silva. After 3 failed tries and after a contradictory constitution in 1988, which brought an end to the military dictatorship and formalized Brazilian democracy and was very socially and labor progressive in some respects, but still formalized Brazilian oligarchy, we had a Workers' Party under Lula's leadership that tried for the presidency 3 times, gaining the presidency in 2003. And as part of a broader set of deals and 2 terms in office, that lifted between 30 and 40 million people out of poverty, that brought innumerable material good to poor and middle-class Brazilians, lower middle-class Brazilians, there was accommodations made with the Brazilian political structure, the traditional oligarchies and parties that run that country. In 2013, there were mass leftist protests in places like São Paulo against some of the failures of the workers' government, that then being led by Dilma, including the way the Olympics and the World Cup were handled, bus fare hikes. Those protests against austerity morphed and were harnessed by the right for a broad, sprawling anti-corruption politics, which quickly centered all discourse about corruption to focus on the Workers' Party, while ignoring and downplaying, in many cases, much more urgent and serious and structural and endemic corruption questions that, of course, implicated all the rest of Brazil's political parties. This is actually happening across Latin America. There's serious corruption charges everywhere from the center-left in Chile to the populist Cristina de Kirchner in Argentina and, of course, in Venezuela. We know, as an example, and I'm quoting now from The Nation, that Cristina de Kirchner was indicted for fraud for conspiring with her public works secretary, Jose Lopez, to steal millions of dollars of federal contracts intended for road work in Argentina. In Chile, Michelle Bachelet left office under a cloud of suspicion. Her family, and by extension herself, is accused of illegal real estate transactions that netted millions of dollars. Now, we understand the difference between campaign contributions and bribes, supposedly. Bribes are things that show up in duffel bags. They're underhanded. They're off the books. But we do know that legally and structurally in the United States, and in Brazil for that matter, where the second highest rate of campaign money is spent anywhere in the world, that corporations and the private sector funnel money from campaigns and are a conduit for essentially governing the political process. We're going to play a brief clip here in the background. This is protests for the assassination of Marielle Franco. We talked about this with Glenn Greenwald several months ago. There still has been no real movement on the investigation of the assassination of a city councilwoman who was almost certainly murdered by people connected to the Brazilian far right. And anti-corruption politics has been used across Latin America as a tool against the left and not something for a broader effort towards corruption as a whole. And any effort towards dealing with corruption as a whole would immediately implicate capital, oligarchy, and all forms of non-public campaign funding structure. And you see this discourse sometimes in the United States with certain people who talk about politicians of conscience and corruption as free-floating ethical questions and not ones connected to systems of power, patronage, and connection. That's what we see in Latin America. That's what we see in the United States. That was what we see everywhere. And until we can realize the line between a bribe and a campaign finance donation is one of legalities and appearance, not real substantive difference, and until we can have a politics that is not just anti-corruption, but a politics that scrutinizes and deals with the systemic conditions underneath that corruption, we will get nowhere. And also, as in the case of Brazil, with a strong anti-austerity movement getting harnessed in the end by the right for a free-floating anti-corruption politics, which Bolsonaro, the fascist, has run with in every way, echoing Pinochet in Chile in the 70s, echoing drain the swamp here with Donald Trump. People's outrage and sense of morality outside of historical and material conditions will never be a winning strategy for the left. So we must be anti-corruption, but anti-corruption in every single sense. And if we follow that logic, we're going to start to become pretty anti-capital. I say that, and then I'll also say, as we move towards October 7th in the conversation with Alberto Almeida, Lula livre, which I think I'm still a little off in that pronunciation, but I'm working on it. I'm going to need to learn Portuguese, I think. I wish I wasn't such a shabby language student.
Duolingo, man.
Does it work?
I picked up quite a bit of French in the run up to my trip there. I was after about day 4. I'm like, you know what? Some of this stuff actually stuck.
Do you have any other language in your background?
I took Spanish, 4 years of Spanish in high school, but
Did
I
you
never.
retain?
Well, I never really went to a place to actually use it. And I feel like you almost need to do that to cement it. But
Yeah, I'm a bad language student, but when I was in Turkey for a while, I did start speaking some Turkish. I mean, yeah. You do got to go. Yeah. But that's good to know about Duolingo. Griscom.
Yeah, I had a Spanish teacher in South Carolina. That's why I can't speak Spanish. They had a very thick Southern accent.
Could you do an impression of that, please?
They'd be like, "Cómo estás?" So it's completely.
That's awesome.
My Spanish was completely useless in practice, but I look at when you look at what's been going on in South and Central America with the question of corruption.
Yes.
It's been used in such a venomous way where it's like, I don't think any of us are denying that there are aspects and there are things that are corrupt within those like political systems there. But what that's being used for is as a shield for the right wing and the military and like the old power structures to come back into power. And that's the wrong thing. And that's exactly what Donald Trump was doing in the U.S., where you have, in D.C., a system that is fairly corrupt, is very much run by, major banks and major corporations. And Trump comes in and says, we're going to come after this corrupt establishment. Well, to do what? To serve those old vested interests. So when somebody talks about, a corruption, anti-corruption regime, you really have to look at what they mean by that, because oftentimes it's a targeted, political attack on certain groups.
Right. And I think also the other really important thing to understand is the difference between the corruption. Like, if you want your party to run Brazil, you're going to make deals with certain groups. Actually, in today's conditions are changing. So now if Workers' Party gets back into power, they're going to need to have a ever-present mobilized base or be permanently threatened by the traditional power structure. But that being said, you also can't make it a moral question, because again, of course there's some people that are just venile and corrupt and they go into politics to enrich themselves or whatever, and that happens across the political spectrum. But there's also understanding the structural accommodations that one might make to get into a position of power, and those deals that you need to get there. And then the question becomes, well, wait a second, if all of these parties are involved in something that's just endemic in the system and has to do with intrinsically by right-leaning reactionary forces, then we can start asking, well, isn't different types of corruption leading to pretty different outcomes? And we're not condoning any of it, but we're already making a big distinction versus this just metaphysical, meaningless category of corruption. We're making smart distinctions, and that's just necessary always.
It makes me think of Ezra Klein tweeted out that we're not in a constitutional crisis unless Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell allow it to be one, which is another way of saying, like, we're in a constitutional crisis.
Yeah, so we are.
And we've basically been in one.
Right.
I mean, you can place it wherever early peg you want, but I think the Bill Clinton stuff in the 90s as a sort of like these are like, this is a split in the ruling classes being exercised through lawfare, basically.
Exactly.
And that's lawfare stuff
Latin America
is super, like,
here.
that's something I feel like it's hard to know about because it's so obscure by nature and that sort of thing. But it does, like, I remember, I'm reminded of reading about the French Revolution and how big of a part lawyers were in that. And it does seem like we're in a similarly sclerotic and decadent phase in society.
I don't think there's any question about that. But let's go to the opposite of sclerotic and decadent and go to the shoutout for a minute. Do we have our...
And we're back.
Shout-out music?
I don't want to get greedy, but if Danarchy could give us a shout-out beat, that would be ill. Top of the line professionalism. Let's get to the shout-out. Shout-out. Creepy. Shout-out. Weird.
I think that's creepy. It's incredible.
Shout out.
You fading us out early? Okay, that's fair. Shout out goes to something that should be happening globally. It isn't, and maybe it's even too small of a step, but it is something in the right direction. The Norwegian Parliament has voted to ban deforestation. Norway, I'm quoting now from EcoWatch, Norway has become the first country to ban deforestation. The Norwegian parliament pledged on May 26th that the government's public procurement policy will be deforestation free. Any product that contributes to deforestation will not be used in the Scandinavian country. The pledge was recommended by Norwegian Parliament's Standing Committee on Energy and Environment as part of an action plan on nature diversity. Rainforest Foundation Norway was the main lobbying power behind this recommendation and has worked for years to bring the pledge into existence. This is an important victory on the fight to protect the rainforest. Niels Herman Ranneman, head of policy and campaign at the Rainforest Foundation Norway, said in a statement, over the last few years, a number of companies have committed to cease the procurement of goods that can be linked to deforestation of the rainforest. Until now, this has not been matched by similar commitments from governments. Thus, it's highly positive that the Norwegian state is following suit. So, a small but vital step in the preservation of the global commons and in the future viability of life and ecology on planet Earth. And this week's TMBS Shoutout. We are obviously close to the end of September. The chill, the ruthless chill of, at least for me, what is a dreaded seasonal change is coming. I really hate it. I do not like the cold.
I love the weather today so much.
I do not agree with it. Even when it's raining like this, you like it.
Yep.
Yup. Let's read some P.G. Wodehouse, drink some tea. Actually, I'll read some P.G. Wodehouse and drink some tea.
I've read a P.G. Wodehouse. The nice thing about P.G. Wodehouse stories is they're very short, and you get like 4 of them in one book.
Yes, you do. Are we saying Wodehouse or Wodehouse? I've heard both.
I'd say
Wodehouse.
I think it's Wodehouse.
Well, that's how it's spelled.
Yeah.
You know, he lived nearby. He lived on Long Island.
He lived in Long Island?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Like for this guy who wrote, if you guys don't know, he's an author who wrote a lot of like satire.
Most
like
people
the
know
British.
Jeeves, I think.
Yeah,
Jeeves'
as Jeeves.
character is...
You know, so he made fun of all the British, but he lived in the U.S. and he would write like for about like an hour in the morning, and then he would drink martinis and watch American soap operas all day long in Long Island.
Hell yeah, dude, that's awesome.
I was sort of with it, really, besides the writing and soap opera part. Everything else sounded great.
Soap operas can be addicting, man.
I've never tried it. Maybe we'll do that when we get to 3,000 patrons. We'll do a soap opera watch party.
The politics of, gosh, I can't even name one.
General Hospital? I don't know. That's the only one I know. Matt's
Days
like,
of Our Lives.
What we're going to do is we're going to pack a bowl and we're going to just watch Days of Our Lives together and just like see like cultural implications of that.
We're going to listen very closely to the string music score that they use to tell you how to feel about every scene.
Well, those hints are not only relegated to soap operas. All right, Matt, where's the music we have that strongly intimates that people should become patrons of TMBS? Okay, that's good. That seems about right. Guys, I know I explain every week we're getting close to the end of the month. It's definitely time to become a patron if you haven't yet. We see that 2,000 in our sights, and we've got some new plans with that in addition to sustaining what we have, making it durable and expanding it from there. Huge amount of extra content. Discord community. This weekend, Luke Savage debunking the myth of Canada's leftism and talking about a illicit history. What'd you say?
OPE. That's what Canadians and Upper Midwesterners say.
Oh, gee.
OPE. OPE.
OPE. OPE.
You down with OPE?
You know Luke Savage. And we're doing an illicit history of Canadian politics. Woke Bros returns this week. Don't forget, October 5th. I think it's sold out, but they might let you sneak in. I'm there for the Count the Ding show at the Bell House. I'm one of the the guests, one of the Count the Dings adjacents. Come Patron Day. Appreciate it. Give you a longer wrap next week. Want to get you in under the wire before September ends. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks everybody who make this show possible, the whole team, all patrons, all the folks in the Discord, all of my advisors, everybody else. Much appreciated. We will be back briefly with Alberto Almeida. Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. I'm Michael Brooks. Joining us now from Brazil is Alberto Almeida. He's a political scientist and author of several books on Brazilian society and politics, and one of the most important analysts and watchers of the current Brazilian presidential and broader elections taking place in Brazil today. Alberto, thanks so much for joining us.
Okay, good evening. How are you?
Doing very well. It's very good to be speaking with you. I really appreciate you taking the time. Let's start just with where we stand now, heading into October 7th. Can you give a brief review? I've certainly talked a lot on this show. People joke about how much I've talked on this show about former President Lula. But there's, of course, also Bolsonaro, the far-right candidate. Can you tell us the sort of main candidates in play right now and what the polls look like headed into the first round of the elections on October 7th?
Yes, for sure. Look, at the moment, there are two main candidates disputing the first place on the polls. The far-right candidate, Bolsonaro, he has a very weak political party. It's very surprising his position in this election. There is the candidate of the parties, the worker parties, the PT, which is the former mayor of São Paulo, indicated by Lula. And there are other three candidates. They have more than 5% of votes. One is Marina from the former Green Party. She has her own party at this moment. This is her third presidential election. And, at this moment, her performance is much worse than in the former two elections that she ran for. There is Ciro Gomes, who was, a long time ago, he was governor of Ceará, a not very big state from the northeast of Brazil. He was a successful government long ago, in the beginning of this century. He was a very successful governor. But, his performance now, it's not good. He had the idea that he would be able to get the left-wing votes. But PT is very strong. It's very hard to take PT's vote. And the other candidate, this is the most surprising one, is the former governor of São Paulo state, which is the biggest state in Brazil, the one which has the greater GDP and population, 23% of the Brazilian electorate. PSDB used to be the main rival of PT in all elections. If I take the last 6 presidential elections, 1994, 1998, the two that PSDB won with Cardoso, and the next 4 elections, all of them, they were won by PT. In all those elections, PT and PSDB were either the first or the second place in the election. The runoff, we had 4 runoffs in Brazil. All of them, they were PT against PSDB. So it's very surprising at this moment that PSDB has such a bad performance in the presidential election.
Is that just briefly? And as that candidate is I just want to get the name straight for everybody because there's so many. So Fernando Haddad is the PT candidate. He's Lula's.
Fernando Haddad, yes.
Haddad. Marina de Silva, is that her name, or Marina Silva?
Marina.
Are you still there? Oh, I don't know what happened. Alberto, are you there? Sorry, guys. I guess we'll just call him right back. Nope, not giving you 5 stars. What's up? Yeah, I know. I was telling Skype I'm not going to give it a high review for that call. It's okay. Everybody can hear that. But hopefully Alberto will come right back on. I don't know what happened. Alberto, are you there? Alberto? I guess, Alberto, we dropped. Alberto?
Hello?
Hello, I guess we dropped. Are you there?
1 second.
Okay.
Is it okay now?
Yes, it's perfect now. So I was going to ask, I believe the candidate you're talking about is it Alckmin? Is he underperforming so much though because he is the types of I guess we'd say like the austerity policy, the neoliberal policy that he advocates is closely associated with the current president, Michel Temer, who, if I understand correctly, is one of the least popular presidents in the world.
Yes, look, I usually say that the most important, how would I say, the actor of this election is the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff.
Yes.
2 years ago. If you take the polls from that year, 2016, 2015, the electorate wanted to vote, would give the victory, the winner would be the opposition candidate at that moment. However, the opposition candidate at that moment was Geraldo Alckmin and PSDB. The electorate is coherent. After the impeachment, after Dilma Rousseff was impeached, the electorate kept voting for the opposition. However, the name of the opposition has changed from PSDB Alckmin to PT Lula. This was the whole point. The impeachment changed totally the game. The impeachment put PT again inside the game.
So how about also the imprisonment of Lula, and how has it surprised people that, first of all, my understanding is that Lula's popularity is actually going up. This is my two parts of this. One is Lula's popularity is going up, and one reason I've heard suggested is that it's because as the economic crisis continues in Brazil, people are remembering that it was sort of, good times under him. And then number two, what has been the role of, there's the impeachment and then there's the imprisonment. I mean, is that sort of these non-electoral means to try to destroy PT, is that really what we're seeing backfire right now in Haddad growing in the polls?
Yes, because the whole narrative of PT, the whole history PT tells, now all of them, all chapter of this history makes sense. They say, PT now says that Dilma was impeached because he was very much in favor of poor people, and then Lula was imprisoned because of that also, and the Brazilian elite, or at least some part of the Brazilian elite, they want to put PT off the election somehow in this way, let's say. And so this history makes sense totally, it makes sense, right, politically speaking. And the whole point is that the current government in Brazil is doing a very bad job if you take job evaluation, presidential evaluation. This is why the electorate wants to vote for the opposition candidate or for the opposition political party. In this sense, the far-right guy is more opposition, much more opposition than, let's say, Geraldo Alckmin from PSDB. I would say, Michael, I have this book, I launched a book this year, and this book is both in English and Portuguese. I have this parallel. PT is the Democratic Party in Brazil, the left, or the center-left in Brazil, and PSDB used to be, or is somehow, the center-right, the Republicans, the Brazilian Republicans, because of the way they are voted, there is this poor people, more poor people, they vote relatively more for PT, and less poor people vote relatively more for PSDB. So the point is that it has changed now. PT has kept his electorate, but PSDB wasn't able to do that.
So now we have the rise of Bolsonaro on the and I think, a lot of people do use the word fascist. We'll use the kind of more, I guess, temperate term, say far right. I guess first, it's interesting. I think you're obviously explaining his appeal well. There's a way in which, this is the sort of far right side of anti-corruption politics and a certain type of populist tide that you could connect with the global far right, from Donald Trump to Brexit and so on. People have made that comparison. But first, I guess, maybe explain, actually, I have a second part, but first, could you explain Bolsonaro a bit more? And then maybe actually why you don't seem, if I read you correctly, you don't seem to think that he actually has it in him to go the distance, even though he leads in all the polls.
Yes, look, he is a federal deputy, an MP. He is in his 7th consecutive mandate. He has been a federal deputy for 28 years. I was looking at the time series of polls, and by the end of 2016, he had 0.88% of votes at national level. In April 2017, 4 months later, he had 14% of votes at the national level. So in 3 months, he was able to get almost to double his votes. Mm-hmm. It's difficult to understand that, because 2016 was a mess in Brazil. There was the impeachment. By the end of the year, in October, there was the county level elections here in Brazil. PT was defeated by a landslide, mm-hmm. and PSDB won very important counties in Brazil, big cities, small, medium-sized cities everywhere. So PSDB was at that moment, was perfect for PSDB to get a good moment, to go up in the national, at the national level. But Bolsonaro he's a populist in a very specific sense. He doesn't have a strong political party. His political party is almost a joke party. So mm-hmm. There is only 5, 6 MPs, no structure at all, just a speech. It's very surprising for me, Michael. Brazil is such a huge country, a continental country with a very big electorate. Our electorate is the 4th biggest in the world. The first one is India, the second US, Indonesia, and then is Brazil. Mm-hmm. So the barriers to be a competitive candidate in Brazil are very high, and he was able to do that, to make it. It is unbelievable, It's something completely surprising for everybody here in Brazil.
So it's surprising, and I would imagine, and again, I'll put my editorial, really disturbing. But you have been consistently predicting, if I read you right, and I want to know why you're predicting this, that and I obviously I hope you're right. But that Bolsonaro will continue in the lead, so that, and there's 2 rounds of voting in Brazil. So this first election on October 7th, unless one candidate hits 50%, they'll go to a second round. No candidate will hit 50%. No polls are predicting that. Maybe, I think Lula was up in the upper 30s, I think, when he was being polled. But that, even with him, it would have been unlikely. The second round will have 2 candidates. You're predicting it will be Haddad from PT, Workers' Party, and Bolsonaro. And then you think, despite all of this, and then sort of coming full circle after the impeachment of Dilma, the imprisonment of Lula, this sort of the PT's own mistakes and self-inflicted wounds, and the relentless battle against it by the Brazilian elite, that Haddad will win. And then adding to the irony, and maybe also speaking to your numbers, this will be the 5th election that the PT wins a presidential race in, because they haven't actually lost any.
Yes. Look, they lost for Cardoso in 1994, 98.
Right.
But look, I think that Haddad is the favorite for sure. You know that the favorites in the U.S. election, Clinton was the favorite and Trump won. So the favorite can be defeated. But he is the favorite in Brazil. We have those polls in Brazil. There is the question about the first rounds, but at this moment, polling people, they ask the question about the second round also. Usually, the question at this moment, the question about the second round is very much able to forecast the final result. It has happened 4 times, you know. It's very hard to overtake the leader. And there was a poll yesterday, and this poll said that Haddad has an advantage against Bolsonaro by from 6 to 10 points percentage. So he is the favorite because he's the opposition candidate, clearly the opposition. And PT is very good communicating and all this stuff, political ads. PT is very good on that. PT is very able to fight. People from PT came from bottom up, so they are able to change disadvantaged situations, electoral disadvantaged situations. So they have this know-how. And Bolsonaro has this anti-systema stance, anti-corruption stance, which is popular also, but he's not able to get into low-class people. You know that Brazil, despite the fact you have a big economy, let's say in gross GDP, but if you take per capita, Brazil is a poor country. And the majority of Brazilian population is very poor, and PT and Lula and all the symbols and public policy, I would sum up in one side the symbols of Lula and PT, and on the other side real public policies to improve poor people's life. It's very well rooted in the Brazilian society at this moment, you know.
Yes. So that makes total sense. So I mean, if Haddad wins. Well, actually, before I get to that, 2 more questions. If in the second round it's pitting Bolsonaro versus Haddad, that creates a really interesting test case for, I guess we'll call them the Brazilian Republicans. So these are the same kind of elites who waged a relentless war against Dilma and Lula. They seem to, I think, obviously have much more hard right policies. They seems to me they also kind of resented the success and popularity of Lula, that a guy who was a metal worker would, do the job better than they did, wasn't thrilling. They're going to have a choice. Is it this they've waged a battle against PT, which is interesting that you keep kind of emphasizing. PT is not, it's much more analogous to a European social democratic party than a hard left party. So the policies are pretty moderate, but nonetheless, they opposed the policies and they waged, total political warfare, impeachment and imprisoning of Dilma and Lula. Do they back Bolsonaro in the kind of quest against PT, or did some of them say, well, we did everything we could, but now we can't embrace, a guy who's openly calling for killing people, who's made pro-rape and racist and all the rest comments, even though Bolsonaro has moved in their side on the economic questions, he's advocating privatization and so on. Where do you think that kind of Cardozo vote will go in the second round? How will they respond?
Look, that electorate, the Brazilian elite, for example, if you take the financial market in Brazil, people from the financial market, they are supporting Bolsonaro. It's unbelievable. The economists, the financial market outside Brazil is against him somehow, or at least the media related to the financial market.
The economists.
Yes. You know that. This week they did an article, a very long one and detailed, saying that Bolsonaro is very backwardness for Brazil. And PT, you are totally right, PT is a very moderate political party. Is a center-left political party, which PT supports only. PT only supports very moderate public policy to improve poor people's life. Nothing more than that, you know. But the Brazilian elite, I would say that upper-class people in Brazil, they vote massively for Bolsonaro.
Okay.
Despite the fact Bolsonaro has a vice president in his ticket, which is a military guy, retired guy, military, and his speech, for example, in US, you have this gun debate, but it's much more rooted in the US history to have guns, and it's related to colonization of US and the whole idea of rights and property. In Brazil, it's not like that, you know. Mm-hmm. It's because of public safety, violence in Brazil. It's not rooted in our tradition.
Right.
I know that it's very debatable in US despite that, but anyway, somehow Bolsonaro has imported ideas from US which are not well fit in Brazil, you know.
Yeah, well, as I say, we hope not. And I'm very sorry for the export of those horrible ideas, and in Steve Bannon's case, horrible personality. Final question. If Workers' Party wins, what do Fernando Haddad as president, the leadership, I think Dilma Rousseff will be returning to the Senate, and then, of course, Lula, and we should say that both Lula has sort of indicated and Haddad has said straight out they're not planning on pardoning Lula, but they will continue a civil struggle for his release even if they win the election. Obviously, the politics of his imprisonment will change, and apparently he's certainly been involved in devising election strategy and policy from prison. What does it look like, you think, if they win? What are the kind of moves that PT will set out to do?
I think that the first move will be Haddad will be very moderate in the whole symbol he used, his speech, even the most important policies in one side. On the other side, if you take the imprisonment of Lula, and if you take two sides of his imprisonment, the law question, and the political issue. If Lula was in prison, politically speaking, because PT had to be blocked, just to block PT in terms of winning the election. If PT wins, so there is no reason anymore for Lula to be in prison.
Right.
You know. So the political problem will be solved to release him. The whole point is that the law is part of the political problem. The Supreme Court in Brazil has to find out a solution for that, you know. And nobody knows how it's going to happen, because even in this sense, Lula is a very strong symbol in Brazil. If it's not well thought, you know, well done. If he's released in a way not very well done in terms of law considerations, you know, the whole strife in Brazil will be even worse after that. So it's a very sensitive topic because of that, you know. Politically, there will be no reason anymore if PT wins for Lula to be there, But in terms of the courts, they have to solve this problem in a very smooth way,
Yep. It makes perfect sense. Alberto Almeida, I hope you'll come back again before the second round.
Invite me again. Yeah.
Oh, we absolutely will. So there we go. We already have it. You will come back and talk to us before the second round of voting. The links are in all of the descriptions, so everybody can follow you on Twitter. And do as I do. You just hit the translate function, and it's not perfect, but you get the information you need, and you inspire one to want to learn Portuguese. Alberto Almeida, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Michael. I accept your invitation. We speak between the first and the second round. It was great to speak to you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Alberto Almeida, everybody. That I really love getting on the ground like that in terms of like somebody who really, is doing it there, obviously. And I like his predictions.
Got to signal boost the alternative media.
Got to signal boost the global alternative media in true TMBS form. Speaking of true TMBS form, we got to get to the two fellas segments before Matt Taibbi gets in here. And I believe we are starting with Matt Leck, because David Griscom has requested to do his economic segment in front of Matt Taibbi.
Oh, really? Okay, well...
No, I'm just kidding. I'm totally messing with you.
I feel afraid to use my theme music today because we're on copyright.
Those fuckers. Nice.
Now, I'm not going to pull up the tweet, but I got upset because a podcast somewhat related to our family of podcasts recently had Rick Wilson on the show. And we've talked a lot about Never Trumpers and how sort of pointless they are. But there's a new sort of test I want you to run on all Never Trumpers.
Yes.
And it's, do they have anything in their inbox that they should be sharing with us about the people they used to consort with? Because...
I like this line of thinking.
They act like they want to be helpful, right?
Right.
Well, the most helpful thing Rick Wilson could do is go back to his time working for Rudolph Giuliani and give us some things that were said in, candidly. A
little bit of Rudolph Giuliani, or maybe more to the point.
And, like some of these guys, they're just media grifters, and they don't actually have much of a Rolodex anyway. But David Frum
does. And Rick Wilson was a legit consultant, is what I'll say. He wasn't like somebody who said, I'm a Republican operative, and then you try to look and you're like, oh, okay, you were like the deputy research ops for whatever. The guy's a real client list, made his living as a consultant.
Yeah, and there's this thing when they come over to the resistance, like they make the demands, they can start, detailing how they think their resistance should be run.
Right.
And that should be a much different transaction. It should be, all right, fork over all of your emails, everything, because we are going to find what makes you useful. You are not going to tell us.
You don't know what makes you
exactly.
useful.
And you don't really want to be that useful.
Right. You don't want to be that useful, because if you're Rick, the one thing, look, I'll give Rick Wilson one thing. He's capable, as literally tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people are, at like harshly criticizing Donald Trump. And I guess kudos for calling him a misogynist and a racist relatively early, but like he is the classic one who will do a like, why do immigrants want to come here? Because we're awesome, and because it's capitalism, and because every single problem in this society that gave birth to the parasite that's Donald Trump, I've been an ad man for decades. Get the fuck out of here. I agree. And I think that's actually a really smart distinction too, because you're not even saying like, you can't like write a book, do your media hits, cool, but you got to put some points on the board before you do that. Yeah. Like you can't just do what other liberals are doing, and because you have a R next to your name, that's basically an identity politics argument. It's pure identity politics. That's all it is. We do have music to test out on Griscom, I think, pretty soon, actually. I think we can still get away with this. Think we can still get away? All right. David Griscom, go.
Yeah, well, this is appropriate because this is a update on the trade war with China. I just wanted to sort of give everyone an overview of this because there's a lot of noise about the trade war, and a lot of people sort of miss what's actually going on and what's going to be more effective down the line. So just recently, the U.S. upped its tariffs on China on another $200 billion worth of Chinese goods, and these goods are facing an additional tax of around 10%. But this is set to increase at the end of 2018. China retaliated with tariffs on $60 billion of U.S. goods, and they have more of a variable 5 to 10% increase. And the problem with this sort of trade war back and forth between China and Trump is that the U.S. does have a lot more leverage at the outset with China to be able to increase tariffs on certain goods that are being imported because China exports so much into the United States. But I think we really need to think more structurally about it and a little bit more about the different factors and the different organizations that are interested in a trade war with China. So there's one thing that a lot of people miss about the Chinese economy, because a lot of people are sort of stuck in what it was even 10, 15 years ago. It's been pretty dramatic what's happened. China still produces a lot of low-end goods, but it's not producing as many as it used to. A lot of China is actually producing some very serious high-tech luxury goods and products. So those are things that are going to be affected very differently from these kind of tariffs. And you look at corporations like Apple, for example, those are excluded from the tariffs after Tim Cook pleaded with Donald Trump earlier this year to make sure that the Apple Watch was not going to be something that was going to be hit with U.S. tariffs. Of course. So you got to understand is that China actually has been able to create some pretty interesting competitors to groups like Google, Facebook, and Apple, and more high-tech products. So there is an interest in sort of punishing China, who's been sort of producing their own goods on their own. And another thing too is like China's really able to implement technology very fast. You look at something like Uber in the U.S., it's taken years for that to really become ubiquitous across the U.S. So in China, they have a ride-share service called Didi, which is something similar. And within 3 years, it had 50% market penetration in China. Mm-hmm. And in the U.S., we haven't even hit that rate. So it's just like a very different system in China.
Right.
But I just sort of wanted to say a little bit because a lot of people want you to predict what's going to happen, and it's something that some people like to do, and I don't think is particularly helpful because
we're going to do a new segment called Grisco Balls. And it's going to be you with a crystal ball. Grisco Balls.
But the thing is, I think the most important things that we need to look at with China is what it's going to mean is that China is just going to look away from the United States as the trading partner, and it already is. And China's already been talking about for years moving away from focusing on the U.S. economy and also increasing domestic demand and domestic spending. And that's the big thing that is likely to happen. So we're going to see what happens because for years China's not wanted to have more stimulus and demand Keynesian spending within their economy out of sort of tacit agreements with the U.S. But at this point, I really don't see too much reason for the Chinese to not start loosening their monetary systems to encourage more growth domestically. And
is that Matt's? Whoa!
I don't know.
That's your button, actually.
Yeah.
Did his button just blow out?
It might be okay.
I think it's all right.
Okay.
But so anyways, the thing is,
it's a Chinese attack.
Yeah. Anyways, the point is that what happens with this trade war. I don't want to make a prediction, but there is a very likely outcome where China just has a very resurgent economy domestically, and starts exporting their goods to the rest of the world without the United States.
Isn't China already doing that to some extent?
Well,
in
they
its
are.
Neighborhood.
Yeah, they've been focusing on that, and also things like Belt Road Initiative have been.
Well, that's the other thing, right? Is that China now is in its own pretty aggressive form of like neoclassical colonialism in Africa.
Well, it's been moving into those markets, and the
Right.
thing is with the U.S. is that Trump's doing blowhard, and in the short term, Trump can get like these wins because I guess the point I was trying to make at the beginning is that China can't hit back immediately on these things.
Yeah.
But what is very likely to happen is that China's going to be able to grow more power internationally, and the thing is that a lot of these consequences in the U.S. aren't going to hit until the spring. Until a lot of these tariffs really start to become unbearable. And who's going to pick up the tab, by the way, for the U.S. tariffs? It's going to be U.S. consumers and shareholders in the large part. So we're really going to have to see what happens. I mean, I guess the point is that a lot of businesses don't really know what's going to happen. It's hard to predict because it's so wild what Trump is doing. So a lot of businesses are being very hesitant about growth strategies for the next few months. So, we could see a slowdown in the U.S. economy. We're going to see higher prices and larger hits on Chinese goods. We'll have to see what happens. But
but it could parallel all these other things where it's like, what is that?
It's my button. When I release it, it just goes. Yeah, it's okay.
When you release it. Okay. Yeah, but it parallels all these other aspects of Trump, which is like, maybe there's a 1 week win, but it's like literally what he's doing is essentially passing the baton. Like, he's basically just being like, all right, we have the UK passed the baton to the United States post World War II, and now in a just much more stupid and less planned way, he's just basically like setting China up, maybe like expediting their global.
He's pushing them.
Yeah, like their global strategy. They're like, oh, I guess we have to move this forward a couple of years because this fucking moron is literally, first of all, handing us the keys, and also acting so stupidly that like we still want some remnants of this system. Like, we still want sea lanes for trade. We still want some sort of general areas of stability, and I guess we're just going to have to take them over.
Yeah, and that being said, a lot of people are having a hard time in China, specifically from what I've been reading. Chinese officials have been having a very difficult time being able to predict what Trump is doing. Not that he's like, master tactician, but it's one of those things where it just seems like, is he really doing this? That you start thinking that you're playing, five.
Well, like somebody like huffing glue on the street. You don't know what they'll do. It doesn't mean. But it's funny. If you're if you're making policy in a place like China, I would say you have to have at least one strategy. Like, you have to have one paper which is like, that blowhard Steve Bannon is telling the truth, and Trump is a strategist. You have to have like the 1% chance that that's what's happening, even though that's almost definitely not what's happening.
No, exactly. I really would like to have a microphone in those meetings
of China. You know what I like? Because I always remember now, it was like when he always was like, they're laughing at us. And it was like, you could do like a cartoon of like Obama's president, and they're just like, oh, Obama, we laugh at you. And then they go, oh no, Trump coming. We're not laughing anymore. I think we do have the laughing ready when we have it. But we're going to take a brief break, and then Matt Taibbi returns, and we'll be back in about, what do you say, like a minute, 30 seconds? All right. Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. Joining us now is Matt Taibbi. Matt, thanks so much. Do we need to be running more fans in here?
Yeah, if you got it.
Turn on the fan.
That's cool.
What's it like out there now? What's it like out there now? Is it hot?
It's raining like hell out there.
It's raining like hell.
Yeah. But
Jesus.
That's okay.
Matt Taibbi, Rolling Stone magazine, new book coming out, The Fairway. Will you explain how people get that, Matt?
Yeah, you have to go to taibbi.substack.com. It's sort of my subscriber site, and you get access to my new thing is I'm serializing books online. So I co-wrote a book with a drug dealer called The Business Secrets of Drug Dealing. That's on there. So if you subscribe, you get that.
I will. That basically, that's about a fourth of my reading habits right there. So, yes.
And I figured I'd follow that up by doing something I've been wanting to do for like 10 years now, which is sort of like a sequel to Manufacturing Consent. Sort of the classic Chomsky book about the media.
Right.
Having grown up in the media, that book blew my mind when I was really young, and but I think a lot has sort of changed in the media landscape. So I wanted to sort of take a whack at what does the model look like now. And I actually went out and talked to Chomsky about it, and had a sit down with him in an interview, and so that's going to be the next big project, and I'm just starting that now.
And I read the introduction, and no, it's really interesting to read it, because in some ways, like, and because even by the time, I don't remember when I read Manufacturing Consent, but I read it already when it was like part of this is dated. Like, it
Right.
still makes total sense, but like they're writing about this Rush Limbaugh doesn't exist and Fox News doesn't exist and all this
There's
other.
like 5 TV channels.
There isn't, right. And you're sort of like the guys in the gray suits saying like, we need to be measured about our approach
Right.
to killing nuns in Nicaragua. And,
Exactly.
right? And
Yeah.
now it's like, maybe we should. Maybe if they weren't communists.
Yeah, no, I mean
Yeah.
his core idea is still true, right?
Right.
Which is this idea that, you know, people in America have this illusion that we have a propaganda-free society because we see this sort of vibrant-looking debate going on in the media all the time. But what people don't grasp is that, you know, kind of the parameters of that discussion have been narrowed artificially, and that's kind of the operating metaphor of this, of what I'm talking about with the fairway in the book. Is that, you know, you got to land your thought on the fairway in the media. It's got to be between two pretty distinct poles in order to get on the air, and people they just don't see those borders. That's the idea. But a lot has changed as well since he wrote that book, and especially with the idea of, you know, with the internet and the whole concept of feeding people news that they agree with in an individualized way that didn't exist back in when Chomsky did this.
In
book,
the way
so.
where it's like whatever your micro prejudice. on
Right, yeah,
anything,
exactly. Yeah, that one
got
little,
you.
Yeah, exactly. They seek you out and they find that. So that's new too.
Well, it's funny. I was thinking of while I was reading it because it's like I go and do these like, you know, well, I don't want to diss the places, but I'm not on CNN or whatever, but I go on like Al Jazeera sometimes or I-24 or these like, you know, global whatever. And even there where I would say they probably are, and it's just true, I just don't really watch cable news. So I'm assuming that maybe those places are a bit more, you know, I see some of the segments they do. There certainly Al Jazeera is more rigorous, more intellectual. But it's like if you do like a 4-minute hit, especially if you're paired up against somebody, it's so hard, even if you know, don't particularly care if you ever get invited back on.
Right.
And you don't have an agenda for any party or consulting firm that you need to peddle, but it's just like, even just by being polite,
Right.
it's like, all right, well, that's the parameters of the question. I don't, you know, it's not my style. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm not the one to be like, well, you know what, like, that's not real.
Exactly.
Here's what's really happening, man.
Right,
You just
right.
find yourself being like, well, I think Republicans need to think about this because, you know,
Yeah.
'cause that's just
Even
literally the way it's set up.
thoughtfulness doesn't really fit the format for the most part. You know, I mean, we like things to be really clear. We like the classic setup is Crossfire, right? It's like one person on one side, one person on the other side. We know who we're rooting for. They're yelling and screaming at each other. Like, there's anything that's not that, people just can't compute, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's an increasing problem with our media landscape, is this idea that there's this whole other universe of opinions and beliefs that are just kind of, they don't fit in that, you know, and where are they, you know? And
Are they like out ahead or are they before and behind? Like,
probably both.
Is it like,
yeah.
hey, there's a lot of really important, you know, talk about how he designed the economy and having an empire, and then it's like, yeah, and then there's all this
Definitely.
other shit that's just flooding at us now, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, it's like,
Yeah.
it's like Chomsky's out, but so's Alex Jones,
Right.
right? And now
Right.
it's like, all right, well, just
Yeah.
everything except, but now it's just in your phone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And it's individually delivered to you, and you know now you can't even really choose to turn off the news. Like now your phone literally beeps at you when it's got an alert. People get addicted to, like, literally addicted to the dopamine rush of seeing a news clip, and you know we've learned to train media consumers, you know, basically in the same way that tobacco companies train their customer base. You know, we get them addicted to the product, and then after that it's just a question of marketing and herding them in, and you know, keeping them in the pen. You know, the corporate media, you know, sort of business model has really turned into something that's very, very much like big tobacco in the last 3 or 4 decades, and that's a pretty weird and messed up thing that we really don't think about often enough, I don't think.
No.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I've heard that's really interesting. I remember I went to I used to do like sort of like not in any super in-depth way, but in my 20s when I was just sort of bouncing around and doing various things, I did some stuff like more like in the brand strategy kind of space, they would call it. Everything's space.
The space.
I was in
I
that
love
space,
that.
yeah. I was in the brand strategy
I'm in the
space.
brand strategy space.
Yeah. Now I'm in the YouTube dick comment space. And
it's 2 spaces over.
yeah, it's a couple of spaces over from the brand strategy space. That's how AIG was in the Goldman Sachs exposure space. and I went to some presentation at some conference or something, and it was on gamification. And I just remember like, and I'm not, it was definitely not like, oh, and I saw how this was going to make, it's like 2011 or something. It wasn't like I didn't like see the future. The only difference was, and how I saw that I was a little out of that space, was this guy was basically explaining how like you can have emotional relationships with all of your gadgets, and you can constantly want to catch them, interact with them through various signals and feedback loops. And he's totally doing the like, so it's actually like a really emotional process. Like he sees it's like I'm giving a spiritual talk about how, if your sink became smart, you could, get sports cars on it, and that would be amazing.
Right.
And I'm sitting there like, that sounds fucking exhausting. Like that was just I didn't see ahead. It was none of that, but I did have at least some like, why is everybody smiling at this? Like
right.
I find my early version of the iPhone at that point, all the shit that I needed to keep track of then with not nearly as much to do, exhausting.
Right.
And they're just like stoked.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 100% going for it. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's freaky. It's freaky. The whole atomization of the media landscape, and and I think if people in the business, and again, I grew up in the media. My dad was a reporter. My earliest memories are from this world. The way that the job has changed over the years. We used to just when I first started, we didn't really think about retaining audience share or anything like that. There was this really kind of sort of sub-intellectual concept of what is and what isn't a good story, and we just sort of promiscuously went after anything that sounded interesting. Now you consciously think when you do any kind of produce any kind of content, you put it out there, you think about am I going to lose this demographic by making this comment, and people very, very carefully tailor what they say, what they report, and what topics they choose to cover. The stations do that. The lineups of the topics they choose to take on, as opposed to what they choose not to take on. It's not just as crude as it used to be, where the main division was we didn't show poverty on TV because it bummed people out because they wouldn't buy Chevys.
Super bummer.
Right. But now it's also like we can't show this because our conservative audience won't like this, or our liberal audience won't like this, and it's become this very, very specified process where we're really not reporting. What we're really doing is marketing, and that's pretty weird, and it's a big difference in the business. And I think a lot of reporters aren't even conscious of it yet.
Yeah. And you also talk about their concept of Flack and how that shows up.
Right.
Which is super interesting.
Yeah, Chomsky's whole take on that was in the old sort of 1988 arena with the media, or pre-1988, if you stepped outside the confines of what the sort of typical anti-communist religion, right? You'd get letters from think tanks, you'd get sort of artificially generated AstroTurf campaigns against your TV report, and then that would trickle down to you, the reporter, and you would learn, sort of almost like a dog does, like not to do that next time, right? And it just becomes internalized. But now it's not that complicated. Now it's instant. You do something that that falls outside the line of your demographic, and it's Twitter and Instagram, and a gazillion people are on you in a second, and there are even paid trolls who
Right.
do that. And that whole part of his theory, I think, is very true, and probably even more so than it was back in '88.
It's just been amplified. I did think of your financial coverage with the anti-communism stuff, and we'll pivot to that in a second, because I do think, like, I mean, obviously, I mean, you know, I'm a materialist, so I think that mostly it's just like, you know, power begets power, money begets money. But there is an ideology, and it does seem like, you know, the through line of everything from, like, well, I mean, maybe that they had to mix it up and kill some nuns in El Salvador, but they were communists, is the same through line as if you just fucking deregulate. You
Right.
know, I remember really becoming aware of politics, like the late 90s, right? Like, and honestly, and seeing people like Thomas Friedman before he was a joke.
Right.
Like, you made him, thank you, into a joke. 1999, when I was like 16, 17 years old, being like, I don't know, these WTO protests make sense to me.
Right.
That guy was trotted out on every show to be like, you
Yet.
don't get it, because it's like a giant Bazir in Lebanon.
Imagine
And
an upside down giraffe. All his metaphors are so great. But yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. I mean,
So the pivot I want to do to talk about the crisis 10 years on and how badly it was covered 10 years ago is just by playing. We don't usually do this. Usually we play the cold opener, and it kind of sets the frame for the show, and it's some type of historical oddity or cultural product, or everything from a movie clip to something about, you know, Jamaica. But this clip of Dick Fuld, who used to be the head of Lehman, is just right, like, already.
He just cracks me up.
Just look at him. I think it gets us into the ethos of, like, there was a world where this guy was a highly respected. He was the head of one of the most important banks on the planet.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It wasn't just, you know,
He was one of the most important people in the world. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Not just the guy that was not as good as the great Jamie Dimon, who hopefully you'll get to as well. Let's just set this up. This is some BBC documentary, and I like how it reminds us of our very own Mike Hanna here.
If we get this right today, hope it will squeeze some of those shorts.
Pause it. Matt can't hear it.
Oh, here, I'll just play it over this. No.
Okay, play it over this. Can they hear? Okay.
Hope it will squeeze some of those shorts. And squeeze them hard. Not that I want to hurt them. Don't get that, please, because that's just not who I am. I am soft, I'm lovable. But what I really want to do is I want to reach in, rip out their heart, and eat it before they die.
Dick Fuld also had an insatiable appetite for profits.
I like the British guy at the end. He's a fucking lunatic. He also melted down the economy.
That's right.
So take us back to, that's actually, Bill Maher takes a lot of hits nowadays, including from people like me. But I remember, I think the funniest line he ever had was, Dick Fuld. What a Dick Fuld.
Well, Bill, if I'm not mistaken, Bill was pretty heavily invested with Lehman.
Ooh.
So he had a personal... there was a little extra English in his hatred. But, I mean, the company was run by a guy named Dick Fuld. I mean,
he's literally named.
I mean, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, Dick Fuld was so hated at Lehman that after the crash, actually during the crash period, when he was sort of on his way out, the instant it was safe to be rude to him, he was jogging in the Lehman gym, and one of the other executives just walked up and belted him in the face.
I like how they skipped it. I like how you said be rude. So I was like, oh, some guy said, hey, fuck you, Dick. You're like, oh, skip all of that.
Wasn't even that.
Forced politeness. Breaking his jaw.
I mean, he was so hated that I'm trying to remember who it was, but I think it was because in the last week and a half of Lehman's existence, Fuld was basically running around trying to sell his bank to everybody in the world, and sort of effusively lying about how fucked up the portfolio of the bank was. And so he tried to sell to Bank of America, and I'm trying to remember who the CEO was at the time, but the guy ended up having his wife call Fuld back. He literally he let Dick Fuld go to voicemail, and then had his wife call him back and be like, no, we're not going to buy your company. Like, that's how much they hated the guy.
Is that Ken Lewis? Ken Lewis?
Yes, exactly.
I had no idea Ken Lewis was so good at cucking people. That's impressive.
It was hilarious. Yeah, and of course, they left him out of the bailout process, and he was the only one who didn't get bailed out. So that was
man.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't have and he was James Woods played him.
Yes.
In the HBO.
Which was probably the first time that James Woods had a tough time conveying the dickishness level. I mean, I think that.
Be careful, he'll sue us. I've seen how that guy does on Twitter. Wait, what is that? Oh God, here we go.
Oh yeah, here he goes. Yeah.
All right, tee off on this.
It's snaking my deal. I cannot fucking believe this shit.
What is he saying?
I don't know. Play it again.
The federal government, it's snaking my deal. I cannot fucking believe this shit. The federal government.
Wait. He's still. Matt still can't hear.
Oh, we can't hear. Oh.
Yeah. Play it. We'll fix that before the post game, but play that. Sorry for everybody hearing this one more time. It's good though. It's funny.
The federal government, it's snaking my deal. I cannot fucking believe this shit.
What I love is that that's not even that old, and it already feels like so dated.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it seems like some like HBO. It's like the Entourage of finance movies.
That's pretty funny. That's probably just about right too.
But talk about because that's Too Big to Fail, and Too Big to Fail used as an example of just how fucked up the press was on, like, talking about, first of all, how they explain the financial crisis, and then how they basically, I guess, for Dick Fuld, everybody else is like kind of deified in that movie.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so it's Andrew Ross Sorkin, from the Times, who ends up running this thing called Deal Book at the New York Times, which was heavily sponsored by all these banks, right? So he's effectively a spokesman for these people, and the version of history that they cooked up. And I think what was interesting for people is that most people just didn't know that this event happened, but like on the weekend of I guess it was the 13th and 14th of September, there was this massive meeting at the New York Fed where you had everybody, all the CEOs from all the big banks except for Dick Fuld, who was conspicuously disinvited.
It's like the only thing that you're ever going to tell me that actually makes I sort of like these guys. I was like, wait, did Blankfein and Dimon exclude Fuld again? That's kind of cool.
No, they do have a little bit of a sense of humor. Like, it's very reptilian, but it's good. I appreciate it.
It's very reptilian, but it's
works
good.
on a primal level.
Yeah, exactly.
Dick Fuld's not invited.
When you read all their like emails back and forth to each other, you will laugh occasionally. So, but they had this huge meeting, and America didn't know about this, but essentially we were this close. Monday was coming, and all these banks were going to not be able to open their doors. They were not going to be able to give credit to their customers. So there were all these companies that weren't going to be able to make payroll, like things, the whole gears of the international economy were going to grind to a halt that Monday morning, right? Unless these people came up with a solution that would paper over the problem of AIG and Lehman Brothers going out of business. And so you had this gigantic, you ever see Michael Clayton, the merger scene where everybody's like running back and forth?
Yes, I have seen. That's also one of Matt's favorite movies.
Right? Great movie, right?
Matt's really Michael Clayton's.
No, I like the movie. There's just a guy that had the poster in college, and I thought it was weird. That's all.
That is. Thank you. That was what I was looking for.
He had the poster in college?
Yeah, I just thought he was a bit too into.
No, that's a weird guy.
It's a weird movie to be that invested.
I know exactly the type of kid you're talking about, though.
What was he trying to say about himself, do you think?
That's the thing.
He had a
it's
certain sense of refinement.
I feel like that's what he was trying to say about himself. You're supposed to ask yourself what he's trying to say about himself.
I mean, that's something that like somebody my age would do. You know what I mean? Like,
maybe he was saying that he had like a certain amount of like,
he thinks of himself as like a corporate 55-year-old George Clooney already.
A world weary, right? Yeah,
but well paid.
Yeah.
Sure, all hands in the midterm.
Weather beaten cynicism. Yeah. So anyway, they basically had like imagine like a Costco-sized version of that Michael Clayton scene,
right?
Where there were just hundreds and actually thousands of bankers and bean counters are trying to basically value the assets at AIG and Lehman Brothers, and trying to figure out how they were going to patch that hole. And the deal they ended up coming up with was like hugely self-serving. What they really ended up doing basically was committing all of us forever to backstopping all of these.
I was going to fucking spitball this, but
yeah, exactly. Let's try this.
Like everybody on the hook. For everything.
And that's exactly what they did.
Except for Dick Fall, he's gonna get fired.
Right.
All right, cool, good, sounds good. So they put all of us on the hook, and then they have to come out themselves and through people like Andrew Ross Sorkin and turn it into a story of like, no one could have seen it coming. It was a black swan event. It was a confidence thing, which is, to me, you'll debunk that in a second, but it's deeply ironic because it's like, this is also supposed to be the guys who say in the economics profession that's like, this isn't humanities, man. Like, this is
exactly.
Science.
Yeah.
Like, we know that you can't regulate things in a certain way. We know that you can't. Oh no, if you put a surcharge on billionaires to vaccinate kids, well, no phones for you. Like, goodbye to indoor plumbing because you fucked up the science. And then all of a sudden they're like, it's like what happened is that like, people just didn't feel it.
Things just sort of.
Yeah. It was sort of the vibe.
Right.
What's that Australian movie, The Castle? Did you ever see that movie? This is another deep. It's actually a really good movie. It's about this like lower middle class Australian family, and they're gonna get basically eminent domain. They live in some like cottage underneath like an airstrip essentially, but like it doesn't bother them. Like they're kind of like happy-go-lucky, quirky. Like, isn't it great? It's beautiful. Hearing and they're gonna get kicked out to expand the runway. And they're going, and it's actually, there's a lot of good. Like at one point, the patriarch of the family's like, like, I'm bringing him to get what the Aborigines felt. This is ridiculous. Like, but they get some like 2-bit, like they get a lawyer that they can't, like is not equipped to argue an eminent domain case in front of the Supreme Court. And he's just like, it's not constitutional in any way. And they're like, how? And he's like, the vibe. Basically the vibe.
I would allow that.
No, I think that he does a better job at the end, but if I recall, it's kind of the point of the movie. This actually really is fucked up vibe-wise. But Wall Street wasn't. That was a very specific scam.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, these guys are professional. Their whole raison d'etre, right, is they're experts at predicting risk, right? Like their whole the only reason they're supposed to be paid more than anybody else is because they're supposed to be good at forecasting events like this, right? And beyond that, preparing
Right.
for the unexpected, right? Like that's their entire value add, is protecting us and our money from unexpected events. And here they come, and they have this closed door meeting at the Fed, and they basically come out of it and end up basically going to Congress and saying, we need like everything, all your money, forever, and otherwise the world is going to end in 10 minutes, and we didn't see it coming. And as a result of that deal, which everybody capitulated to, they ended up being able to sell themselves as the people who saved the universe, when in fact what they did is create this gigantic raging suckhole of debt through years of crime and fraud, and then they got us to pay for all of it. And it's just it's an amazing exercise in completely doing a 180 on what the narrative should have been, and they were able to get away with it largely because the subject matter was like a couple of notches too complicated for working reporters, I think. Yeah.
And so and then specifically, like, how did characters, like, how does Ben Bernanke get to be like, I'm the, crusty, serious academic with a heart of gold? And how does James Dimon, to this day, be
they
like,
love the
I'm
guy.
an oracle, or, Hank Paulson. I even remember every single profile I ever read of Hank Paulson said more about the fact that he was like a Seventh-day Adventist.
Right.
It was always like, Hank Paulson,
a man of profound faith.
Right.
Yeah.
He can't take an Advil right now. Boy, does he want one. Anyways, he's going to take all your money and go fuck yourself. And then other weird stuff that they thought was humanizing, like Hank Paulson was so competitive in college that he and his friends would puke during ping pong tournaments.
Oh,
like,
my God.
that's fucking weird. That's not normal. Like, you're not supposed to puke at a pickup basketball game, dude. Like, it's not healthy human behavior.
You're not Bill Russell, actually.
Right, yeah. All those guys that actually do operate at peak performance, they don't do that.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Like, or like, I don't know, you're not Pete Sampras. That was Sampras. He always used to puke in the locker room.
Yeah.
That was so annoying as like a Agassi fan. It would always be like, Sampras is too ill to play. You'd be like, oh, fuck.
Sampras
He's going to
had
recover
a serious
in 5
sense
minutes.
of humor issue. I always thought,
Oh, he was a dick.
Yeah, remember that exchange where Agassi taunted him about tipping?
Yes. Actually, can we pull that up?
That was hilarious. That was one of the funniest things.
That is hilarious because it also really revealed, like, I think it revealed, like Agassi. I mean, I like Agassi. I think he's a cool guy, obviously. But, like, just the way Agassi is being a little bit of a dick, kind of messing around. Sampras is, like, stone-faced, and then Sampras becomes wildly inappropriate. I think this is...
No.
Yeah, it is. It is. You got to go forward.
You got to go forward a bit.
You got to go forward to the actual... Oh, yeah, right in the beginning. This is it. This is pretty fun, guys. If
champion.
Wait, I thought it was them.
Guys, congratulations on an amazing night. Pete Andre coming all the way into town. Rafa Rogers.
No, it's going to be a clip where they're actually playing together.
Playing
I think
in like
it
a
is
smaller
this.
arena.
It might be this. It's just... You just got to see them actually on the court together. Oh, go to the next one. I think that's the next one. Things get ugly.
Yeah, this
between
looks like
this
it.
one. Things get...
Can I hear it?
Pause it. Sorry. This is actually really... I love this. This is awesome. This is the... By the way, this is also the way people can digest the financial crisis, with lots of entertainment interspersed. Okay, yeah, let's watch this for a second, then we'll get back to these characters.
Of Sampras and dominated in different
thing.
His forehand is so much more flat than someone like Rafa's.
This is going to be so awkward when it happens. Hope it happens soon, though.
No, it's coming.
It's coming. It's pretty close. It's not bad tennis. Look at that. Rafa is beautiful.
Everybody just loves each other.
Good shot. Thank you.
I like, yeah, Rafa and... Agassi, you can already tell Agassi's face. Or did we miss it?
It's like so important for me.
Fetter said we're in the lead. It's really the first time they have led.
You always have to go get serious, huh, Pete?
Yeah, now we're starting. I like this.
I meant to miss that. No.
I know.
Oh yeah, we should. All right, yeah, speed it. Go forward. Well, we got 3 minutes of it. Oh, we got 3 minutes of it. 3 minutes left. It's getting there. All right. Okay. Oh yeah, right here.
Ah.
All right. Now Sampras is doing an impersonation of Agassi.
No
I should say, pause it.
Ah.
What's about to happen is Agassi's going to say, "I want to do an impersonation of you." In Agassi's book, he said Sampras was a notoriously bad tipper. So this is where it comes from.
Ah.
Not a bad Agassi impression by Sampras.
Say something. Say
No,
it.
I'm waiting. I want to impersonate you.
Okay, go ahead.
I don't have any money. I
But by tipping? Okay.
No, wait. I got $1.
Oh, look at Sampras getting.
That's how you want to play, huh?
It's all fun and games till somebody gets hurt, huh?
All right.
There, the sense of humor's gone right there.
Gone.
Look at him. He can't help
guy.
himself.
This guy.
This rivalry is intense, man. I mean, Rafa, start. You know.
Federer trying to break
Do
the
something.
tension.
Yeah, the Europeans just can't play this.
Whoa.
And then he tries to beat him. Yo. That's so good.
Oh, yes.
But
Yeah.
Sampras would, like, they would say, like, he's sick in the locker room, and then he'd, like, come out and play amazing tennis.
Right. Yeah, which is more interesting in a pro athlete, less interesting in a gazillionaire chief of Goldman Sachs, I guess.
Less interesting than some asshole who worked at Goldman and is now some asshole of the Bush administration.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Right. Like, how do you perform with that kind of illness at, like, the peak of human existence versus, like, you get your assistant to get you tea, and then you melt down the global economy.
Yeah, no, it's the myth making that surrounds these guys is unbelievable. I mean, when Jamie Dimon gets a bonus in the same year that Chase paid out $20 billion in regulatory funds, which is like $1 out of every $3 they netted, right? And but all you saw on TV everywhere was this guy is he's the smartest guy on the street. I mean, nobody could do the same job that he's doing.
How did that one get started?
He's the smartest guy on the street.
Yeah, like, how did that get started?
Well, that's one paradox I've been thinking of,
Yeah.
is we hear about too big to fail, and it's like these giant sort of banking behemoths.
Mhm.
And then the whole thing is about these asshole personalities that actually
Right.
get to make the decisions. So it's not like some impersonal corporation, it's just an asshole.
Yeah.
Well, right, yeah. I mean,
you should actually. That's that's very memeable, Matt. It's not some giant impersonal corporation. It's just an asshole. It's not bad.
Yeah, no, I mean, Jamie Dimon was the first guy to get really lucky, basically, because what happened was the first of all these companies were basically financing the creation of all these crap mortgage loans, right? If you remember back then, anybody could get a mortgage, right?
Right.
And a huge percentage of them were going to go bust in like 10 seconds. And a lot of the banks were playing this game where they would try to squeeze as much value out of them as they could before unloading them on some other sucker. And the banks
Like
that got
pension
killed,
funds.
like pension funds, insurance companies, other hedge funds, but typically the victim was like somebody's retirement fund. That was or Fannie and Freddie even, like that was a typical one. But some of the banks were really dumb, got caught holding this stuff too long. Dick Fuld, Lehman.
Dick Fuld.
But Bear was first. Bear, people forget this.
People forget about
Bear died in March, And there was another meeting to which Dick Fuld was disinvited at the Fed, where nobody's ever really clear what happened at that meeting. But what we do know is that the moment everybody left that meeting, everybody massively shorted Bear Stearns, and the company died. And then Jamie Dimon was allowed to go buy the bank, basically with huge backstopping from the Fed for pennies in the dollar. So again, the central problem with all of this is that this mischief, the reason we couldn't let companies like Bayer just die is because they were too big, right? This was the core problem. And everybody knew this. The guys at the Fed, Timothy Geithner, who was running the New York Fed at the time, knew this. Bernanke knew this. So what do? They make the companies bigger. Like that was their solution. They just decided to take this, dying toxic firm Bayer and just stuff it into Bear Stearns, make us eat all of the losses, and then you created Jamie Dimon, and that's where this legend,
that's literally where the brand comes from.
Yeah, that's where that's where it all starts. The legend of this guy's the smartest guy in the room. It's because he wasn't broke at that moment, so they got the opportunity to get a federally aided, massively discounted purchase of one of the top 5 investment banks in the world. And then they repeated the same process, with Washington Mutual, after the crash. And that's where you get this legend of, these guys are so smart. It doesn't matter that we gave them $25 billion to buy these properties, but, they're smart nonetheless.
Or in a way, is it like, yeah, they are smart for like gaming the system, which is the point.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Like we want to be honest about what we're talking about with intelligence.
Sure.
Like, okay.
Yeah.
Like if Andrew Ross Sorkin rewrote Goodfellas, it would be like De Niro was a fucking genius. Because like he robbed an airport and then he killed everybody.
He actually liked to steal.
He liked to steal. He told her not to buy it for a coat, him not to buy a caddy. Got rid of them, recoup the losses. It's a genius.
The same amount of blueberries in every muffin.
Don't do anything fucking flashy. It's the Jamie Dimon of Goodfellas.
That's what it should have been. That's what we needed. We need a Nick Pileggi to do Too Big to Fail, right?
Absolutely. Well, I think that would have been. I mean, I'm sure I stole this from you. It had to have been. But I remember one time I was at a gym. And I don't even know, it was like literally like at a fucking treadmill or something. And like, it was a guy who liked to have conversations at the gym. I do not. And he was some finance dude. And he tried, and somehow we got into this something. Mm-hmm. And I really don't remember what he's talking about, but I'm sure this type of analogy would have been something I would have built from you or maybe one or two other people. And I was like, yeah, but isn't that like the scene in Goodfellas where you guys like light a restaurant on fire,
right,
collecting insurance? And it was so funny because he started being like, at first he was all like, well, I mean, like, no offense, like you're a really smart guy, but it's like I've worked on the street. And and then I gave him that. And he's just like, yeah, that's basically true. I was like, right. Now let me do my fucking run. Listen to Nas.
Actually, that scene it's totally like if you were going to talk about like a leverage buyout, it's totally it's the mob bust out. It's exactly what it is. We're going to use somebody else's credit to run up a huge tab, and we're going to pay ourselves massive bonuses out of that, and then when the company dies, it's like it's your problem. We'll just light it on fire. Like that's basically
business slow. Fuck you.
Sold
fire in the kitchen. Fuck you.
Should have sold more toys.
Yeah, should have.
Exactly. That's KB Toys right there.
Should have faked more signatures on like condo developments in Florida and Nevada. Like, what is the myth that we've been all paid back supposedly? What's that one?
Well, I mean, that's a tough one to counter. I've talked about this a lot because first of all, just defining what is and is not the bailout is kind of tough.
Right.
If you just want to talk about the TARP, which was the part that came out of the actual treasury, meaning our taxpayer money, that was a little bit less than $700 billion. And yeah, they did pay that back. But most of the bailout came in the form of these sort of emergency Fed lending programs. And, it really depends on who you talk to. Some people say we spent $14 trillion on that. Other people say it was, 5.6 trillion. The special inspector says we had a net outlay of 3.3 trillion, which would mean that we not outlaid, but spent about the amount of the annual budget of the United States on the bailout. But it's really impossible to say how much of that money has really been paid back. And then there's the other part of could that money have been paid back if we hadn't massively subsidized all of these firms with programs like quantitative easing, where we're basically just giving them free money and like hand over fist.
Whereas you could have just sent tax rebates to homeowners, like, here, stay in your house. Here's bottom-up quantitative easing.
Yeah, we could have.
Why the hell not that?
We could have paid off every subprime mortgage in America entirely for $1.4 trillion. So that's
fucking enraging, actually. That's like really. I try to keep it with a little bit of fun and bullshit going on, but what the fuck?
And the funny part about that is I think one of the reasons why that wasn't even contemplated as a solution,
right,
gets into the whole AIG bailout, because a lot of these companies had a massive short position against their own mortgage instruments. So the losses didn't come from the actual mortgages. Like, there aren't enough poor people in the world to cause that big a hole in the economy.
Right.
The losses came from the bets on the mortgages.
Right.
And this whole gigantic synthetic economy we've built around sort of derivative instruments, credit default swaps, stuff like that. So it's people betting on pools of mortgages, and people betting on those pools. If we had paid off all those mortgages, none of those bets would have been paid off. So a lot of companies, like in the AIG bailout, like Goldman got $13 billion just through that bailout. A lot of it was probably because they were betting against mortgages. If we had paid off all the mortgages, they're not getting that money. So
right.
So and that's another part of this whole story, that if you really want to dig down into like what's infuriating about it, like, we didn't just bail out the companies. We bailed out their most socially useless activities, like betting against their own products and stuff like that.
Right, of course, naturally. That's the most innovative area.
And that's like $174 billion, on the AIG bailout was almost entirely that. No.
And they couldn't even do, it's so funny because like the bonus thing is so structurally unimportant, but
right.
They couldn't even just symbolically say, in exchange for melting everything down, having all of your criminal enterprises be subsidized for us into eternity, and then rewriting the rules of the economy to actually further re-entrench all of the bad trends from financial concentration to broad income inequality. We're going to cap your bonuses for a year or two, just even for the sake of like a couple
Optics.
Of dumb campaign ads.
Right.
Right. And then Geithner was just like,
no.
Fuck that.
Sanctity of contracts. They actually rolled that one out. That was amazing. I remember that.
Is that like before you explain that, is that like the financial version of the Supreme Court in 2002 being like, that would violate George Bush's civil rights?
Exactly.
And that is the 14th Amendment, which we take super seriously.
That's
in this
right.
Very one instance.
Yes, we that law was passed, for slaves, and but we're going to apply it to George Bush in this case. Yeah, right.
Which, by the way, fuck that. We'll get back to that. As regards to voting and fucking lead in the water, we've got problems, but it's totally not cool to count a vote where some old Jew voted, because that would be unfair to George Bush.
A massive civil rights violation by the repeat civil rights victim, George W. Bush. Yeah.
And so they literally said sanctity of contract.
So they were going to just pay everybody. So one of the things that they did when the state effectively for a while was running AIG, and they were just sort of paying everybody whatever the management of the old management of the company was telling them to pay, and they were saying, oh, we need to spend a lot of money for talent retention, but then there came this moment.
I bet.
Yeah, and that was ridiculous too, because literally 90% of the people that they were spending all these bonuses on, if they had lost their jobs at AIG, would have been unemployed forever, right? They would have taken any haircut. But the only time that anybody even thought about raising an alarm was when it came time to pay out the $450 million for the tiny London-based AIG financial products unit, which had essentially blown up the universe. They were like patient zero of the crisis, because they had all these bets against mortgages. They were basically the bookie of Wall Street, and they took like $500 billion worth of action. And unlike the rest of the company, which is an insurance company, like, you can't write insurance policies without having assets, right? But you can sell credit default swaps without having a dime.
Oh, hell yeah, dude. Yeah, right. Yeah, it's great.
So they wrote
this little unit in London.
London, right? Like, this run by this guy. If you can find a picture of him, Joe Cassano, who's like the biggest asshole in the universe.
Joe Cassano, Matt.
Yeah.
Matt, can you find a picture of Joe Cassano?
Cassano. Without any capital at all, they just basically took in like $500 billion worth of bets. And all of that ended up helping destroy the company, which helped cause the financial crisis and everything. And instead of putting those people in jail, this
motherfucker,
this guy, yeah, exactly, this guy. I was actually sitting right behind him during that.
He really does have the effect that you advertised.
So he made something like $280 million over 7 years. Didn't have to pay any of it back.
Of course.
But AIG insisted on paying the $450 million in bonuses owed to this one tiny unit in London that had essentially destroyed the universe. And their argument was, well, if we don't pay it, the entire system of contracts will be at risk, and we have to honor contracts.
Trust.
Otherwise, capitalism, and people bought that. Like, that actually happened.
That goes back to Chomsky.
Right, yeah.
That's manufacturing consent.
Totally.
I mean, Jesus fucking Christ.
Yeah, people should have been running through Congress with an axe during
people who made billions of dollars off of intentionally fraudulent housing contracts,
right?
Of which they paid and worked with scumbag shyster companies to lie to and exploit the most vulnerable people in the country who just wanted a shot at housing their families.
Right.
Then they unloaded their assets on, the firemen's union first, and then us. And then it's like, wait a second.
Yeah, we can't.
If we don't pay that guy, and then on top of it, it's that guy. I don't know, man. I can't. What more do you need to vote for Bernie Sanders? Jesus Christ!
It's incredible too, Andrew.
At the very least, vote for Bernie Sanders. A lot of other things that I shouldn't advocate for in public setting.
Bernie was one of the few people who was like, wait, what? And that was one of the reasons I started to really pay attention to him, actually, because there were lots of people in Congress who actually saw this transaction and didn't freak out. They were like, okay, we'll pay it, whatever.
That's what is it? There was a phrase that it was cognitive capture, right? It was like some of it is not just corruption in the donation sense. It's like that Tony Blair line. I always use it because it summarizes so much. There was a Tony Blair gave, I don't know what year. I just remember he was giving some Labor Party speech and he was defending all of his just moves to the right that pissed off all of his people. And there was always it was like, is he doing this to please Murdoch? Is he doing this because, what's the strategy? And he ticked off all of those reasons. He's like, it's even worse. I actually believe this stuff. Which is a good line. But it's like, yeah, right. These fucking people actually believe this stuff.
That is funny. That would be the worst reason of all. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
That's pretty funny. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of an interesting moment we're in right now, I think. Because there's been a little bit of movement, there are some people who were hacks for a long time, but now they're like, oh, wait a second, we can actually do this. We can actually say Medicare for all. We can actually say,
oh, yeah,
fuck the banks. Oh, cool. I actually would like to say that.
Right.
And then the other people are like, no, I really am committed to this tiny slice of Westchester politics. That's my shit. That's
the other thing that was really amazing about that time period was right after all that shit.
This guy,
right?
Who we still have to look at.
Yeah, we still have to look at him. We paid him all that money. Goldman, instantaneously after getting the TARP bailout, after getting the $13 billion from the AIG bailout, their first quarter in 2009 was a record bonus period. You know what I mean? So they didn't even pretend that they were gonna tighten the belt at all. They went right back to spending the money, and right after that, you started to see these articles in the news that were like, "Where's all the anger coming from?" You know,
why is everybody so pissed?
Yeah, people out there they're angry for the sake of being angry, and then that sort of trope in the news persisted for years and years and years. And when Occupy happened, it became this thing in the press. It was sort of the wither the anger towards Wall Street article, which was just astonishing to me. Because if anybody who actually followed the story understood these guys were high grade ripoff artists who had hijacked every last cent from basically from old ladies, right?
Literally,
yeah. We think of the person who calls up on the phone to your grandmother and tries to sell her an overpriced magazine subscription. That's the person we would chop up with an axe, right?
Fuck that, yeah.
Right?
Lowest of the low.
Lowest of the low. And
right.
That's what this was. This was
right.
Institutionalized that, right?
Right.
And yet, to this day, we still have this, where's all the anger coming from? That part of it was really mystifying to me. I just
did Andrew Warren Sorkin have any choice moments during Occupy?
God, well, he went down. If I remember correctly, Sorkin actually did go to Occupy, and then he went back and sort of reassured the banking leaders that the pitchforks weren't coming imminently. There was some kind of exchange like that where he reported back to them that it's okay.
He's it's all right. Wait, because that's the other funny thing is it's almost like it seems that that people in finance, maybe because they're aware of how much just rampant criminality and immorality they're getting away with, they actually take the backlashes more seriously.
Of course.
Right? Mainstream pundits it's bullshit. And they're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
If people get how much we are fucking robbing them.
Yeah, they all bought guns. Remember that? There was that whole period where they're all arming themselves.
Yes.
They should have too.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The thing is how, I'm always referencing, but you even see it in Brazil. It's you see the financial press today, under when Lula was president, there was and of course it was because of a commodities boom partially, but the economy was expanding in this massive way in Brazil. And all he did was, he had redistributive policies and lifted people out of poverty. But it was no, he was a super win-win president. And there's still, financial markets are jittery at the prospect. And it's I mean, honestly, even by your own metric, why?
Right.
And now they're pivoting to support like an overt fascist because the kind of mainstream austerity candidate isn't going to win. And, you know, obviously, look, I would support the radical, well, we're just going to take all your shit option. Those are my politics. But it's just amazing because it's like they're not running against Chavez. They're running against like a social democratic party that like everybody did well under, and it freaks them out.
Yeah, no, we can't have even that.
Yeah.
You know, that can't be countenanced at all.
It's so incredible. Yeah. So Sorkin went and he assured everybody and then did you have conversations with peers where they would be like, why are they doing this? Why are they occupying Wall Street?
I mean,
and why are they snapping their fingers?
I think one of the funny things the interesting thing for me is that most of my sources actually ended up being Wall Street people, because and a lot of the criticism that I got from sort of the financial press was, oh, he's taking this sort of socialist critique of the banks and doesn't understand finance and all that stuff. Actually, no, 100%. I knew nothing about this topic before I started on it. It was all coming from mid to smaller sized hedge funds and banks who were pissed off that these companies had been dumb and should have failed and didn't. Right, and now we're being subsidized, and the government was picking winners and all that. And it was essentially a capitalist critique of what had happened, right?
Right.
And so most of the people I was talking to were like, yeah, fuck those people. Like, you know, just don't get them confused with us. You know what I mean? Like, I think there was a lot of that sentiment back then. Is that
I actually really like that because the mid-sized bank guys were like, don't confuse him with us, and then some like fucking Fox viewing asshole who, you know, and the judgment is not in the earnings but in the context, who's making like 50 a year watching Hannity is like, get your hands off of the market.
Right. Exactly.
All right, so we're gonna keep going. We're gonna go to the post game, and we've got a special Gulag edition because Matt and I are finally going to work our way through this Thomas Friedman classic.
Oh my God.
And that is going to take up the bulk of the post game, to be honest. We have we've got some Ben Shapiro sound. We've got a few other things we've got to get to. And I just want to say, as I said, 2,000 patrons in our sites. Patreon.com/TMBS. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks so much to Alberto Almeida for joining us tonight. Thank you to Matt Taibbi. Thanks for sticking around.
Thank you.
And thanks to super producer Matt Leck, chief economist David Griscom, super producer David Slavic, and each and every one of you. We will be back in a bit for the post game.